Well, joining us now is the Government House Leader Mark Holland, the Member of Parliament for Ajax. Mr. Holland, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Listen, I do want to talk about the convention with you because this is the first time your party members have been able to, from across the country, meet face-to-face in about 5 years. But it's hard to ignore what's happening right now in Parliament Hill and the questions being asked about Michael Chong, his family, and why he was not informed that they were being targeted by the Secret Service in the People's Republic. What do you say to the narrative that he's now pushing out there, that he's heard it from the Prime Minister's own security advisor, that they knew about the CSIS report?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that it's horrific that any member of Parliament would be targeted by any foreign power. And I think it underscores the times that we're in. The reality is that whether or not it's Russia or China, there's a number of different foreign countries that want to not influence our democracy. They want to destroy our democracy. That's their objective. And for foreign interference to be dealt with that kind of intensity, I think is a wake-up call to all of us. So the first thing is enormous empathy, because that could be any one of us. But the second thing is to say, and really let's step back and think about this, if any government of any stripe accepted that a member of Parliament's family could be intimidated without taking action, that would open up, frankly, grave danger for all members of Parliament. I don't know how many members of Parliament have been targeted by Russia, but many of us have been named. Many of us have been identified. And so we are in very volatile times. And what I think the Prime Minister was very clear about is that he nor the Public Safety Minister was made aware of this information, and have said to CSIS, no matter where the threat is, it doesn't matter if it's deemed to be a low threat, that members of Parliament have to know, and that information has to be carried forward. So that's been a clear directive to our national security infrastructure to say that if there is a member of Parliament, even if that threat level is low, even if they don't deem it to be something that needs to be elevated, that it must be shared and somebody deserves to know. Mr. Chong deserved to know, as all members of Parliament deserve to know the threats that are against them and their families.
Okay, so, but if the CSIS report actually made its way up to the National Security Advisor, is that where the ball was dropped then?
Well, I think we have to ask the question, we have to be very careful with national security. The national security institutions that we have are responsible for managing national security information, making threat assessments, and deciding where that information goes. It is not up to us politically to direct them. In this example, because it directly affects politicians and because that information wasn't shared politically, we've said, because of the context as well that we're in now, that it must be shared. But I think we have to be very careful, and I understand the instinct to want to try to understand and go in, but we're dealing with national security here. We're dealing with the professionals that are charged with handling national security.
And I think that's what people are trying to understand, because people are not talking about this as a communications failure, but rather a national security failure. So where did it fall then?
Well, I mean, again, on this side, we have to be very careful. When we're talking about national security, as much as we want to be able to just open that up, there are people watching how we're responding, people that are in countries that are watching how we use this national security information. And for us to just, lay all of this out on the table and have a conversation with it, will do grave danger to our national security infrastructure and, frankly, with our relationship with other Five Eyes countries. What we have said is that there was a leak that this information existed. The threat assessment would have been what it was. The security and intelligence infrastructure would have looked at that threat and made a determination of what should happen with it. We can't politically direct that. But what we have said in the future is that if a member of Parliament is targeted, regardless of what the national security infrastructure thinks that security threat is, it must be shared. And that directive is clear on a go-forward basis. And we also have to recognize that we're in a very evolving and complex threat environment. Russia, once it invaded Ukraine, once Russia and China are having conversations about collaborating, this is a very different situation today than we were in a couple of years ago. So we're viewing these events in a very different light, and it's possible that our security and intelligence infrastructure is as well.
Okay. The other question is, why is the Chinese diplomat based in Toronto not yet expelled? Because if they were involved in this type of targeting of a family of a member of Parliament, why are they still allowed to be in Canada?
Well, I think the facts have to be worked worked through, and there's a lot of that that's behind a curtain, necessarily of security and intelligence. There has to be a response and a conversation that happens with Beijing in terms of what occurred. And that's happening. The ambassador has been summoned to have these conversations, and we have to move through those with deliberation, because every action we take has a consequence. But let's be very clear. You know, my first convention, we're here at a convention, I was 17 years old. I walked into that convention, as every young person walks into a convention, full of hope for our democracy, with a feeling that you want to support and build up our democracy. That's what's happening right now. Is our democracy is under attack. Whether or not it's Russia or it's China, what they're hoping is that we turn against each other, that we become divided, that we think of each other as the enemy in this. There is no question that every member of Parliament, every person who is devoting themselves to our political process wants democracy to succeed. And that means we do not want to see these kinds of actions taken. We're united in it. And so I think we need to calmly work with one another. We need to dial back, some of the overheated rhetoric that we see here, and really ask, how can we work together to protect our democracy and make sure that thing that we share, that extends far beyond any political party, that is a core value that Canadians have, which is that we have a democracy that allows us to govern ourselves through and decide who leads us, that we protect that. And that is something that I think we're all very committed to.
Mark Holland, really appreciate the time today. Thank you for that.
Thank you.